So going to these meetings isn't just about making decisions and directing the network. Sometimes there's a lot of creative energy in the room where people are getting inspired, like, oh, wow, that is a really cool use case. I'm not in telco, but hearing that telco use case now makes me think of something in my marketplace.
Welcome to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. I'm Daniel Francis.
I'm Ken Anderson.
And I'm Paul Madsen.
If you are a developer, an entrepreneur, crypto enthusiast, or just trying to learn more about how distributed ledger technology and Hedera Hashgraph will impact your industry, then you'll love the episodes that we have coming up. Bookmark us, add us to your podcast app, and stay tuned.
Hey there, and welcome to Hedera Hashgraph, Gossip About Gossip. I'm Paul Madsen. I've actually had the pleasure of working with my guest today in two other projects. The Liberty Alliance was focused on federated identity, and then the FIDO Alliance based on secure authentication. And now we're together working on Hedera. Brett McDowell is my guest today. Brett is the executive director of the Hedera Council. Welcome, Brett.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
Yeah, my sense is that I was involved in Liberty before you. You were involved in FIDO before me. I preceded you in Hedera, so it's your turn, I think, to find that next project. I'll follow you.
How about fishing off the end of a pier?
Yeah, that's good. I've got a river nearby, so we can coordinate that. So, you're an executive director. My sense, based on my experience watching what you do over the years, is that executive directors herd cats, but the cats have lawyers. And acknowledging that for many of those years, I was one of those cats that you were herding. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, you were in the feral group.
It's my lawyers, I think, that were feral.
Yeah, so the executive director is kind of a catch-all. It's like, well, let's create this role in any sort of collaboration, coalition context where we're just going to throw all the responsibilities at that role. And that is the person that is expected to figure out what has to happen next, hold it all together, keep everyone going in the right direction. One of the important things about doing the job well is to make sure you're always in service mode. I think some executive directors somehow find themselves playing CEO. And it really works better when you're in a coalition to make sure you're always in service of the group. So that's one thing I try to keep in mind. This is not the last industry coalition that I'm working on. I may very well be working with these same companies in a future project. I'm just here to serve what this group is trying to achieve in this project at this time. And so I'm trying to bring some of that perspective to Hedera.
And so specific to Hedera, what does that service manifest as?
Well, it's definitely herding cats. With Hedera, so Hedera is unique from a lot of the projects I've worked on before. So let me get into a little bit of my background. So in general, for pretty much the last 20 years, I have been working on industry consortia whose mission was to create collaborative technology. So in that way, it's similar to Hedera. We're going to come together and collaborate technology, but up until now, it's always been standards. We're going to introduce a new standard to the industry. We're going to create some new interoperability, some new functionality for the web, the internet, email, what have you. What is different about Hedera is that Hedera is also a full production shop.
So we're the full stack in a sense.
Right. And we have, this operational commitment, right? So even though it's a decentralized network and the nodes are independently governed by the node operators, the council is there for kind of loose coordination around that governance. And then because of that, there is still some shared coordination that of an operational nature that you don't find when you're creating standards.
How would you define governance? What does the council do?
So let me take a chapter out of our CEO's handbook and describe the council's role. So these are things that Hedera has publicized before. By the end of this podcast, we'll get into some new areas that maybe we haven't talked about publicly before, peeling back layers of the onion. But let me start by recapping what we've said before. So the role of the council is to govern the platform, the feature decisions. So what features are going into the platform, and the roadmap. When are those features going to the platform? In other words, prioritize features for the platform. A great example is the latest Hedera consensus service. That is a new feature of the platform that wasn't there before. And a lot of what the Hedera consensus service was inspired by contributions from council. They also govern the fee model. How much are those API calls going to cost? What's the right way to build a sustainable revenue model for the LLC, the council, and the incentives and the rules for operating those nodes. Also, the software. So when it's time to upgrade the software, the council is the one who ultimately approves that upgraded software, that distribution of software to the nodes. And then last but not least, manage the treasury. So those 50 billion HBARs that were minted, how exactly do those get introduced into the market for utilization on the network over time? That is also the council. So those are the main kind of 5 points that the council covers.
Those are rather high level, but at the end of the day, any consortia like Hadera manifests in meetings and emails and at least most recently Slack channels. Can you talk about the logistics of how the council works?
Sure. So I also can give you kind of a frame for each of those. So there's the council, which is this collection of no more than 39 organizations, and they serve limited terms. So they're not there forever. We want to keep rotating representation from different marketplaces, different use cases. The council meets right now. Basically, they meet as often as they want to. Right now, that's once a quarter in person. So we've had 2 quarterly in-person meetings. We're about to have our 3rd next month, but they may decide to meet at a different pace in 2020. Then there are the committees of the council. So the committees is kind of how the council gets their work done, and the council meets to make decisions based on the work of the committees and the proposals coming from the committees. So the committees that we have a finance committee. We have a technical steering committee, which covers that roadmap I talked about before. We have a pricing committee, which covers the pricing that I talked about before. We have a legal and regulatory committee, which helps guide our compliance. We have a goal of being the standard bearer for regulatory compliance, and we have a committee dedicated to that. And we have a membership committee who, after the initial members are seated on the council, then all future seats are elected. And the membership committee plays a role in that election, kind of like a nominating committee. And then we have a marketing committee, which helps guides what information needs to be shared with the public, when and how. And they give direction to the team that oversees public relations, analyst relations, and the like. So those committees you could get off of the list that's already been published before in the LLC agreement. And we formed a new committee that's going to be focused on use cases and working with the network developers and optimizing and proliferating the best use cases.
I've begun participating in 2 of the committees you cited, the technical steering committee and pricing. And like any global organization, we confront the realities of distributed members in different time zones and having to balance calls at fair times for both Asia and Europe. I'm lucky. I'm Eastern. I'm in the middle. So it's all good. So you talked about membership. You're involved with discussions for potential members. What convinces them to join Hadera and take on this role in the council?
Council membership is really for a company that's already decided they want to use this network. That's the first thing I say to a company that's looking at this. We're not really out there recruiting companies who just want to be a part of the cool new thing. The governance responsibilities that council members have are important. We need to make sure that they're committed to the network, that they have self-interest in the success of the network. And the way the model works is they don't have a financial interest from the council. They're not going to make significant profits simply by being a council member or operating a node. We do think that's a cash positive proposition, but it's not. We designed that so that in itself is not the motivator. the motivation needs to be, I'm going to run applications on this network. I need this network to perform for me. It needs to serve my needs as someone who's utilizing a DLT. So that is what sells people on the council. Once they have decided Hedera is the network for them, these are the collection of features that they're looking for. Now it's kind of easy to look and say, well, I want to have my hand on the tiller. I want to make sure that I am steering the ship, that I am in more control of my destiny, and I can make proposals and argue for prioritization of the features that I most want, et cetera.
Yeah, I've seen that dynamic, talking to enterprises who are pondering the technical characteristics of Hedera and the advantages. And the light sort of comes on that they might meet the criteria of becoming a council member and see that value proposition. So 39 council members, eventually, we'll get there in phases. When you compare that number to the number of nodes on the network that will also scale to, 39 sounds centralized, just sort of intuitively, it's a smaller number. Why do we believe that this council and its governance will be invulnerable to the sorts of bad things that can happen between large companies?
So I think what you're tying together there is the notion of centralization and invincibility against bad things. So let me just talk about centralization at first, and then we'll talk about corruption. So the reason I really like this model, and I joined Hedera after this governance model was designed. What attracts me to it as the best fit for the purpose is that you do want some level of coordination among parties that are ultimately deciding the fate of the network. In other networks, you might have an open source foundation. You might have a bunch of contributors. And I have a brief history of providing some consulting to the Bitcoin Foundation at a time when they were entertaining taking Bitcoin into formal standardization as a protocol. And so when I was working with them, it was literally a handful of individuals who are all contributors, and whatever they decided, there went the network. And so you take that model, compare it to what the co-founders of Hedera have come up with, and some of the virtues of the Hedera model are now, instead of a handful of individuals who you can't know much about them if you're just a user of the network, and you don't know what their motivations are, their history, and you replace those with large corporations with very valuable brands that are more valuable than anything they might get by trying to corrupt the Hedera network. So now they have the incentive to be good governors, to maintain that brand value, and you kind of inherit the trust of those individual companies and the work they've already done to earn their trust. So you have a more decentralized decision-making process. I can say that from seeing it firsthand in two different models. Now, in terms of catching corruption or being less vulnerable to corruption, 2/3 of the council members have to agree to just about all those decisions that I mentioned before, and they have to take action. One of the things about the Hedera model that I really like is that it isn't just soft power. It isn't just bureaucratic governance. It's also cryptographic governance. They're using their private keys to sign transactions. And if those keys aren't used to sign those transactions, the software doesn't get updated. The new council member doesn't get added, et cetera, to the different decisions that the council has to make. So it's enforced cryptographically. It is more decentralized. And the public, the user base, which is what really matters at the end of the day, are the application developers that are launching on Hedera and the users of those applications. They have very clear visibility into the motivations of the council through the shorthand of the brand value and brand messaging of those members.
Yeah, I also think about the different tensions that each of the council members confronts in their home market, right? Different regulatory pressures, different market pressures, and all of which sort of create this, I think, healthy tension between the council members that would prevent the C's, whether it's censorship or corruption or collusion, et cetera. Brett, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about current council member news. Yesterday, we announced IBM and Tata Communications. Any thoughts there or any hints as to our next release?
Well, I guess what I would add to the news is that I've had the opportunity to work with both of those council members for a while. So council members sometimes announce themselves weeks or even months after they've joined the council. And it's just about, the right opportunity and timing that makes sense for all parties involved. We're pretty flexible about that, especially as we're ramping up prior to open access. I guess I would add to the news that we do have more council members to announce. I expect those announcements to be coming relatively soon. So I have been able to work with both of them, and they have both been very active contributors. Back to your point about different motivations for the different council members, one of the things that we work pretty hard at is making sure that we have representation from different regions. Different regions gives you different regulatory environments and different vertical markets. Different vertical markets gives you diversity in motivation. What features do people really want to have, and how are they approaching it? How do they guide the messaging? How do they guide our approach to compliance? How do they guide the technical steering committee? Both of those companies have been hands-on contributors and valuable contributors. Again, that's what you would expect from the criteria I mentioned before. Companies that have already decided Hedera is important to them, and they want to be involved in directing the platform.
Yeah, also diversity in use cases, right? IBM in their quote yesterday supporting their membership emphasized consensus service, because clearly that integration is of value to them. Tata might see something different of value in Hedera. You listed 5 functions that the council performs, and you described those as ones that Mance has always previously talked about, but you hinted at something additional. What are those?
Not only the use cases, so one of the things that I did not list is how they collaborate. So when we gather, we've always dedicated time in our meetings for use case discussion and exploration. And I'll tell you, every one of the companies I talked to prior to joining, they're very interested. They're like, okay, we have some ideas of how we want to use Hedera, but what are other people doing? What are those other companies doing with Hedera? Just like any other co-opetition situation I've been in the past 20 years, some of that is kept close to the chest and some of it is more open and collaborative. I've seen a lot of collaboration in Hedera when it comes to use cases. So going to these meetings isn't just about making decisions and directing the network. Sometimes there's a lot of creative energy in the room where people are getting inspired, like, oh, wow, that is a really cool use case. I'm not in telco, but hearing that telco use case now makes me think of something in my marketplace. So that's one of the things that isn't kind of laid out in their responsibility, but it becomes essentially a benefit of being on the council and being part of those meetings and a part of the email exchanges and the conference calls. All the committees are meeting typically once every couple of weeks, sometimes more often, sometimes less, depends on what they're working on and what they're trying to get ready for the next council meeting, proposals, getting ready for approval, that sort of thing.
That dynamic of exchange of ideas, you might almost call that a network effect. Excuse the pun. Brett, thank you very much. This has been great working with you again. We look forward to that next project, Fishing on the Pier, I think it was, right?
That's right. And that's with an FISH, not...
Right. Well, yeah, our FIDO history prevents us from supporting PH.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Brett. And if people want to learn more, they can go to hedera.com/council, where they can even read the LLC agreement and review meeting minutes.
Thank you for listening to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, rate and review, and also share and tell your friends.
Or connect with us on social media like Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Hashgraph, particularly if you want to leave us feedback on the podcast. We look forward to hearing from you.